Shooting it raw?
Yes. Shooting it raw. Is there a Vince in the house? Calling in Vince, Dr. V.
Here you are.
How you doing, dog? Vince Tinguely, who I've known for a bazillion years. You're like the elder brother who I love. And yeah, we'll talk all about what you've been doing these days. And I'd love to share your work. Because, you know, I consider you to be a kind of creative spirit who is dedicated in a way that few people I know are. Not many people like you in the world. And I just respect and love it. So welcome to Shooting It Raw, brother.
Oh, thanks for having me, Ren. I'm glad I can finally get on it. I was forced to get a laptop for school this year. So that's the only reason why I can now do this with you.
Let's just dive into the photos, and I'm sure we're going to have an amazing conversation. So you've been doing photography for a long time, and I've always known you to have a camera. And in this image, it's the one of the plane. So you're basically using what looks like 1600 ISO film, black and white. You're shooting into the sky above. There's a sun just behind the plane as it's about to pass. And, there are a few wispy clouds there. What I love is that you can see the graininess of the film, which you don't see in digital, because in digital pixels don't quite have that feel. The way it's weird to call it the feel of film.
The graininess is more chaotic than pixels can ever be.
Mm-hmm.
Pixels always adopt a sort of geometric configuration.
You're right.
Grain is grain.
Right. What's the story behind this photo?
Okay, well, it's interesting that I just mentioned, learning how to ride my bike on Leicester Square, because this relates to the same era. This is the 3 years as a child when I lived in Winnipeg. My dad was in the Air Force, so we moved around a lot to different bases and stuff. So in Winnipeg, of course, the cool thing was my dad worked at, I think it's 16 Wing is what it's called. It's like the Air Force unit there. So there's the military base, like the airport, and then there's also the international airport right there. And the emergency landing field, which is like a mile and a half or 2 miles of field before you get to the actual runway of the airport, was just like a stone's throw away from the block where I lived.
Oh, wow.
So I'd go over there and I have early childhood memories of being 6 or 7 and like running around in this field with, jets flying overhead.
Fun.
So it left this huge impression on me at the time. And when I moved back to Winnipeg last year, one project for sure was to go out there and recreate that experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everything is still there. The house is still there. The Leicester Square is still there. It's huge. It's like a huge piece of prairie, but it's the size of a city block.
Oh, wow.
And the only thing on it is like some swings and stuff on one side and teeter-totters and the same on the other side. And that's all there still. And the emergency landing field is still there, except now they built a Tim Hortons at the far end of it.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yay, Canada.
Which I actually had to go to. I had to visit there and get a coffee just for the experience of like having these jets roaring right overhead, right?
Right. Okay, so this image was made when...
It's the most recent picture. That one was taken. And yes, it is on film. I have a Canon 35 millimeter that I got used.
Mm-hmm.
The company of Scott Duncan, by the way.
Wow.
When I bought that.
Okay.
It was this camera shop on Mount Royal.
Right.
Like a used camera shop. And so I used, I don't know if it was 1600 film. It might have been 100.
Okay.
I'm not sure. And, I shoot the film and then I take it to the photography shop and I hand it over and say, develop it, scan it. I don't want prints.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. When would you say you first started using cameras in a way as an expression of your creative impulse?
Oh, geez. quite young because my family was big on cameras, and my mom had a Brownie and my dad had a box camera.
A German box camera.
Yeah, I can't remember what the brand was, but
Hmm.
so they were shooting these black and white pictures back then.
Okay.
And I always loved, I just loved the technology. I thought it was great.
Sure, it's magical.
So I think I inherited my brother's like sort of cheapo Instamatic camera where you would put the film in a sort of a cartridge,
Uh-huh.
and it had like, a lens. It was a fixed lens camera.
Mm-hmm.
And I started using that when I was probably 11 or 12.
Right.
And then I did the yearbook my last year of high school. In Ontario, there's 13 years, so I was in grade 13.
Uh-huh.
And I learned how to develop black and white film while working on the yearbook that year.
Nice.
So that was when I started, really liking to shoot in black and white because I could also print my own pictures.
Uh-huh. Okay, so right now you're in the town of Montgomery Stokes. Where are you exactly?
I'm in Winnipeg.
Oh, Winnipeg.
Manitoba.
Right, Manitoba. Eh? Okay, so let's rewind in terms of cities. Before Manitoba, you were in Montreal. Yeah,
For a long time.
For a long time.
27 years.
Okay, before Montreal, where were you? So what is the trajectory between your childhood that landed you in Montreal so that we'd meet, and then?
Oh, wow. Well, like I said, my dad was in the military. So after we lived in Winnipeg, we lived in Kingston, and then we lived in Ottawa, and then we lived in Petawawa. And then I graduated high school, and I went to London, Ontario for university for 4 years. Then I enrolled in the journalism program at King's College University in Halifax.
Oh, wow.
And I was there for 2 years, and then I bounced around a lot after that. I dropped out, and I started being a bohemian. And so in 84, I moved to Montreal, lived there for a year, went back to Halifax for a year and a half, and then at Vancouver, and then came back to Montreal in the later 80s, and then went back to Halifax for 4 years, and then finally moved to Montreal in 92 for keepers.
Mm-hmm.
Made the commitment, and 2 years later we met as fellow poets.
That's right, yes. So are the years of fluffy pagan echoes. So we had Scott Duncan on the podcast. I had Victoria on the podcast. I have you on the podcast. I just need to get Justin, and then it's a virtual reunion, I guess.
Yeah, I hope you managed to do that with Justin. That'd be interesting.
Yeah, for sure.
He's such a great raconteur when you get him going.
No, I know. I haven't spoken to him in years, in bazillion years. Haven't seen him in forever. Was it possible that there were crows in the background while you were talking?
Well, the window's not open.
Okay.
But you might have heard crows because we're next to, like where I live in the house, we're next to a large cemetery.
Ah.
So there's a fair amount of wildlife on that side, and then on the other side, a couple of blocks away, is the Red River.
Okay.
So there's a stretch of wilderness, so to speak, there as well.
So behind me is jungle because I live in the crazy part of Hong Kong in the country park, and
I love when you show pictures of that.
Yeah,
it's such an amazing landscape.
It's nuts. Yeah, it's beautiful. But right now, as we're speaking, there is a typhoon happening in Japan, and people are dying. Maybe, I don't know. The surf is up in Hong Kong. When there's a typhoon killing people in the Philippines or Japan, usually it sends surf to Hong Kong. And right now, there's insane, like for the past 24 hours, there's been a lot of lightning and thunder. So I like the idea that while our conversation, it's like this foreboding, you'll say something and all of a sudden, Vince has spoken. Let's move on to the next photo. It's of Hugh fixing the Walkman. Okay.
Yes.
And
what do you think of that one, Rand?
I love it. I think it's like there's that. Well, first of all, what I love is that it's a print that's maybe been scanned. It has been scanned. Black and white print. It's that sort of black and white quality that is quite warm. You can see that the print has some kind of rust degradation or stain on the top left. So it's basically this
Yeah.
young man listening to old style earphones in a nice, what I'd call like it's like a white long sleeve shirt. And I usually call those shirts a little number because, you know, when I love those, I love those little shirts. And he's sitting at a desk, and he's got what looks to be like maybe a soldering iron. And it's beautiful.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. You know, it's like, you know, it's the texture, the beautiful of the texture of the skin, of the shirt, of his hair, of the desk. It's actually a beautiful print. So what's the story? So I know a little bit about Hugh.
Yeah.
So what's the story behind this one?
Well, first of all, the print itself shows like how, you know, I took my skills from the yearbook and was applying them to print these pictures. I think I printed that one in Montreal in the shed when I lived with Victoria.
Oh, wow.
And we had a shed that I turned into a dark room. It was like completely set up with, like, I got a Czechoslovakian enlarger for $20 from a yard sale years before, and I'd moved it from apartment to apartment to apartment without doing anything with it. I finally set it up as a darkroom. And so that's where that was printed. But the picture comes from the mid 80s. And we were living in the youth hostel in Halifax, where in the off season they would rent rooms to students. So there was me and Hugh were sharing this room. And it was actually an old lab for kind of like a school. So it had these counters running on two sides of the room.
Nice.
Like when you're in the lab classroom in high school, set up. So that's where he's got all his Walkmans set up. And he was going to the art college in Halifax, the NASCAD, it's called, Nova Scotia College of Art and Design, that term. And one way he had of breaking the ice with people was to offer to fix their Walkmans if their Walkmans stopped working. Because this was a couple of years after the Walkman craze, and everyone had bought Walkmans, right?
Yeah.
And after a couple of years, the little rubber bands inside would start to wear out.
Mm-hmm.
He became like a Walkman whisperer. Like he became well known as someone who could get the Walkman working again.
Awesome. That's great.
Yeah. So you can see he's got like a ton of Walkmans there that he's working.
I can also see that he's got like a mini ponytail, like just creeping.
Oh, yeah.
Is that possible?
Well, I don't know. His hair was always at different lengths depending on you know.
So yeah, and you guys were good friends.
Yeah, we were very good friends, and we were both exploring the arts in our own ways. Like I was more into writing, and he was a painter and visual artist. Mm-hmm. So we used to feed off each other, you know, for inspiration and for ideas and for encouragement.
Right.
That sort of thing.
Of course.
Yeah.
Let's. I mean, you want to say more about Hugh, or is that how you spell his name?
No, that was his nickname, but it was Hugh.
Right,
you know,
but he nicknamed himself Hui. Got it.
Just because of the fact that he was a painter, so there's this talk of hues.
Right. That's great.
But yeah, I love the way that, like you said, it's a very warm picture. It looks like something from a Renaissance painting or something. There's so much texture to it.
It's so soft. Yeah. And then to the next image, it's the three kids. It's so I'm saying 1970s, but it's like, you know, big hair. So you got three kids together could be a playground, it could be I don't know, a trailer park, I have no idea. And it's black and white again. I like how you printed it with the sort of the rough cut border. This is again, there's that warmth and that beauty of black and white prints when it's done well. Yeah. And so this is really beautiful. So what's the story of these three kids?
Oh, again, that's one I printed myself. I was a member of the Halifax, I think it was called the Halifax Photo Society. And they had a place where for $5 you could use their darkroom and develop pictures. It was great. So that's where that came from. But the picture is from 1982 when I worked for a carnival in Northern Ontario.
Mm-hmm.
It was a carnival based in Winnipeg, and it traveled through Northern Ontario. That was its tour.
Mm-hmm.
So in this case, it was in Geraldton. And the thing about being a carny is every town, there'll be a certain number of kids who will just sort of attach themselves to your ride.
Right.
And they'll be there all day.
Yeah.
You know, and so you get to know these kids, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you know, they'll run errands for you in exchange for a couple of tickets and that kind of thing. So that's one of the interesting ways that we had to get to know people as we traveled through Northern Ontario. So these kids, they were Cree Indians.
Oh, okay.
You know, they really dug the Ferris wheels, so
Yeah.
they were like hanging around all day. So
Fun.
they were very easy subjects to take pictures of, because by this time I'd known them for 2 or 3 days.
Right. So roughly just so I can describe the image roughly in the middle, there's the taller kid. He's a boy. He's got big hair.
No, it's all those are all girls.
Those are all girls. Oh, so
Yeah,
there's a girl who looks like quite beautiful face. And then the next to her is another girl with much darker features. You know, beautiful dimple. I love dimples. So it's so cute. She's very sweet. Yeah. White sweater. And then next to her is a much younger kid who looks like she's probably about 7 or 8. Yeah, it's just like a sweet snapshot of summer. You know, it's so just gentle and beautiful.
That was the interesting. I took about 200 pictures that summer, like with the carnival, and you can see how, to start with, I was like hanging way back, far away from people, and like just taking pictures of the midway and stuff. And they're kind of boring pictures, but then as I got to know people, the pictures become more and more intimate.
Yeah.
So because that's the kind of photography I like to do, is just like with people that I've, you know, have some sort of a relationship with. It's not just take pictures of strangers.
Sure. Yeah. So what we can do, if you look, listen, you've been doing photography for a very long time, and I love the fact that you said, "Oh, you know, I think that summer I think I took about 200 photos," which in the digital age is like you do in a day, you know. Whereas, yeah, but at the time back then, you know, it's like each time you click the shutter, it's like that's like a, you know, $2 click, you know. So you can't just go shoot forever. So yeah. I love that. You know, you made reference to it of being like living the bohemian life or whatever, but of all the people I know, you really have a commitment to living on the periphery, or I don't want to say the margins, because it's not like you're like this weird sort of reclusive hippie, whatever, but you don't quite fit the mold. So
yeah, sure.
So let's go back to when we met. Okay, so when we met, you're I'd say you're about a good 10 years older than me. I don't know.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Easily.
Okay. So we met.
More than that, probably.
Right. So we met when we started doing performance art and performance poetry, and so when we started doing the performance, I was just starting in creative writing, but you had been writing for a lot longer.
Yeah. I never studied creative writing, but I started writing when I was in grade 5, when I was 11 years old. Mm-hmm. And like, it's a consistent practice since then. It sort of changed, you know, the kind of stuff I was writing back then, of course, was more like, you know, trying to copy J.R.R. Tolkien, or, you know, that sort of fantasy, sword and sorcery kind of writing, right? Or science fiction or horror and that kind of genre stuff. And then I started writing more, or thinking about writing more seriously, after I went through university and I was exposed to actual literature.
Right. Well, you know, I find your writing and thinking and expression, because when we met wasn't a writing group. When we met, it was a performance group. So you're doing a lot of performance. So what Kindle?
What you don't know, Ran, is I was writing when I started with you guys. Like, I learned how to perform from you guys.
Okay.
I learned how to perform from Ran and from Justin and Scott and Victoria.
Yeah. Okay.
That's how I learned. It was like a workshop for me.
Mm-hmm. For, like, in terms of my life, that we had really together had this focus of in training and practice of outputting performance and poetry and writing in a way that it was quite unique in my. Now I know you continued, and definitely Victoria has continued in that as well. And it's not to say that I'm not a practicing writer. It's more the idea that we were really focused on being creative and being productive in a way that I thought was very special, for sure. Looking back.
Well, we were in that milieu too, like all around us. Like, we suddenly discovered that there was this whole community of people like that, doing sort of DIY performance / zine making. It all came up, and it came up in all sorts of different places around that time as well. In the mid '90s. So, it was quite an amazing time for sure. Mm-hmm. Like really inspiring, right? Like because this is pre-internet, so everyone was just dealing face to face. Like people would go to these shows every week, like Enough Said, just to hang out with everyone else, exchange ideas,
and feed off each other, as you say.
It was extraordinary. It was a great time.
Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say, eventually, in 2001, so like 6 or 7 years later, Victoria and I took Ian Ferrier's idea of doing a book about this spoken word scene, and so we actually documented it. By that point, it was starting to fade, right? The grants started coming in and started getting more formalized at that. But when we were doing it, it was the Wild West, right?
A little bit, yeah. Well, it was definitely just this kind of thing where we're being very opportunistic about, well, we could do it here, we could do it there, we could and just keep building.
Well, there's all sorts of venues to perform and to get our work seen. So it was great. It was a community.
Yeah, and throughout, what I really respected and still do is that, I mean, you had your camera and you were documenting, and in a way, like every once in a while, you'll send me like a found image from back then, and I was like, oh yeah, I remember that. You'll just these obscure images, because so it's like you had these two roles. One of them was the photographer, but also the performer
and the documenter, because I also have all sorts of audio recordings of our shows. Because there's a lot of them that I didn't document because I didn't have a flash for my camera.
Right.
So there's no pictures from the Phoenix, right? Like there's no performance pictures from when we did for the 10 months that we were at the Phoenix. Yeah. Nobody thought to take some flash pictures there.
Because I think like pure performance. Well, first of all, we were actually performing, so we weren't necessarily removing ourselves to document it. But we were very much in the spirit of this is happening now, and it may just fizzle. Whereas in a way, I think now we live in a time where everything has to be documented, or else it didn't happen.
Well, there'd be no way to do it now without being documented, because someone would be there with their phone, right?
Right.
Yeah. So it's interesting because I mean, certainly there are audio recordings, but still there's certain performances that are completely ephemeral. Like they happened, and the only thing that remains is the memory, or maybe a flyer or something. Yeah.
So after that, you went on to do the radio show, and how many episodes did you do with Victoria? Did you ever count them?
No, that'd be impossible.
There's hundreds.
No, it's not impossible, but I started doing radio in 1985 with Hugh, the picture. You've seen the picture, right? That was actually when we were doing it. Was when we were rooming together that term, and that was at the Halifax station, CKDU FM, and then I started at CKUT in 1987.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that was when they went on air, like in November 87. They were not an FM station before that. And then I left after less than a year, and then I came back and started doing radio there again in 94. And then Victoria, like I didn't really want to do a show again. I sort of decided I wasn't going to do shows. And then I got the opportunity to do a fill-in with Victoria.
Mm.
And so that was how our show started, the Victorious and Invincible. That was in like August 95.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm trying to remember when she stopped. Would have been like 2007, 2000.
Yeah, years later. Yeah.
I don't know. But we did that show for many years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Let's okay, so you and I stopped living in the same city because I kind of went away and I did my thing.
Build your life.
Well, when I moved to Toronto and then ended up moving back to Montreal and then moving back then to Hong Kong. So now more recently you're teaching, right? Right now these days you're teaching at the University of I want to say University of Sockeye and Mackerel. What's it called?
That's right. No, I'm actually not teaching. I'm learning. I'm
a student. Oh, you're a student. Right. Got it.
Yeah, they let me into the MA of Cultural Studies.
Oh.
Which is proving to be a very rich vein of inquiry indeed. So I just started, it's this year that I'm doing this MA.
Okay.
And it's just starting. And it's going to be all online because of
Right. And is this more of a Canadian oriented? Is it more of a recent, or is it more of a sort of historical view? What is the program really oriented towards?
Well, cultural studies, it's a fairly recent area of study. From what I can gather, it started in the 60s in England. Like basically I'm getting a full sort of survey job kind of course on, the whys and wherefores of cultural studies. And then there's other courses about methodology, like how you go about doing your research.
Mm-hmm.
So it's going to just, like from what I can gather, it's going to be a lot of reading.
Right, of course. Of course. Why did this come up? I mean, clearly you have all of this experience behind you. You have this perspective. You have this commitment. How does this fit in to your development?
Well, there's been no support whatsoever for my art. I've never had a publisher other than for Impure, the nonfiction book. I've mostly self-published my work. And so, of course, that to say there's no money, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm always having to come up with some alternative form of income.
Mm.
So for 15 years, I worked in a used bookstore in Halifax under the table, like without any sort of, no protection. It was just an under the table. And that was fine because it gave me the time to do my work and so on. But then I started having a lot of health issues in Montreal, and it had to do, I think, with the apartment I was in. It was probably black mold. I was so sort of chronically, this sort of low-level form of fucked upness, if I can use that term on a podcast.
Of course you can.
Like physically, like health-wise.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't as if I was totally debilitated, but it was just always there. And I was always kind of like going from one weird symptom to another. Well, it was like a vortex. It was I was just going around in circles. I was going to work, coming home, being sick,
Wow.
Not really having any friends around, like no support network left, nothing like that. And I thought, well, I'm going to die and nobody will even notice.
What?
I better get out of this situation.
Wow.
And I did that luckily I managed to save up some money and I just moved to Manitoba.
So is going back to Manitoba something that has in many cases, once you shift environments, suddenly it opens up new doors in your own head, new opportunities or new energy.
Well, it totally did. Yeah. It's like a reboot, eh?
Yeah, 100%.
I found that before with moves. It's an amazing effect. And, I chose Manitoba because I didn't really have any options. I was I really had no money to speak of. So I had to do something, on the cheap. And it seemed like the most drastic thing I could do. And it really worked out because my health definitely went, it did a 180.
Right.
So I was much better right off the bat.
Because you're out of that apartment that was
physically,
right.
and so I could focus, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I couldn't focus anymore. I was like just stumbling around, right? And then I decided, well, what am I going to do with myself? I don't know anyone here other than a few relatives. So that was why I started checking out school.
Mm-hmm.
And I was lucky enough at the University of Winnipeg to get into, well, I got into a couple of undergraduate courses just to sort of show the grad studies people I was capable of doing this.
Right.
And once I'd done that, then they accepted me into the MA program.
Okay.
So that's what that's about. It's basically, well, I got to do something. Right?
Mm. Okay, so what is the creative outlet that you have? Is that really a need for you to have that creative outlet, or is it kind
absolutely.
of a yeah?
No, absolutely. I'm a writer, and I've been doing since 2012. I've started working on what I call like autobiographically based fiction,
Mm-hmm.
or auto fiction. They call it auto fiction in the school, and it's very intensive writing. So I've got one book manuscript that's into a 10th draft. That's pretty much done, and then I'm working on another one now. But it's just like a universe. Like I can just lose myself in this, and it's great.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of how I keep my sense of self together, really.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Especially in these times, because everything's just sort of blown in the wind, right? So,
sure. So
art is a great anchor, it like for the artist. Like
mm-hmm.
it doesn't. It's not just you're not just motivated by wanting to get rich, or well, obviously not get rich, but be popular or any of these things. There's
mm-hmm.
also the work itself.
Right. Well, okay, so here's what connection has come up in my head when you talk about that. Okay, so
sure.
One of the great things about Montreal's arts community, certainly when I was there and in my sort of development, was this sense of community that was so strong, right? It was kind of split between English and French-ish, because in terms of the academic side, the universities were kind of split English-French. But there was still such a vibrant artistic community that we were all the sort of self-reinforcing. And I just remember like the parties and the get-togethers of so many different kinds of artists. Like you've got César, who is his own little brand of chemistry that was just so so perfect. And then all of these other writers and painters and performance artists and musicians. And yeah, so it was so fertile. And so at this point in the conversation, we can either go back to the last photo that you had sent me, or we can go to, which I'm also curious about in terms of in Winnipeg, how are you finding your people?
Oh, well, I'm not. I haven't found anyone.
Really?
I had one friend here, Cliff Euland, who was quite a well-known artist. We were friends in that same picture of Hugh there. I had met Cliff at the same youth hostel a couple of years before that, because a lot of art college students were living there in those days. He became, a well-established Canadian artist, and he got a job at the University of Manitoba. So he was living here for quite a long time. So I was dropping in on him and visiting him, at his studio the summer of 2019. But then he had a double lung transplant a few years before that. And,
double lung transplant. Wow.
Yeah, and it deteriorated that fall, and he passed away even before the COVID-19.
Wow.
It had sort of, COVID-19 had happened, but he simply passed away from his own complications. It wasn't COVID-19
sure.
that did it.
Wow.
Although, he was worried about it. But,
sure.
So that was, that was sort of my connection to the artistic scene here, and he died. So you know.
So okay.
And then there's, you know, I haven't really had a chance to build anything else because you know, we're all locked down, or you know, people are not interacting much anymore. So
yeah, especially with COVID and everything. So what's Winnipeg like in terms of the social distancing, in terms of people being able to cross paths?
Oh yeah, well, you know, we're so far from the center of the world that COVID-19 hasn't really taken a hold.
Oh wow!
In the way that it has in a lot of other places.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's a certain amount of it, but it hasn't like exploded like it has in so many other places.
Right, and I think, and especially Winnipeg having like 200 people as a population or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. You know, like, you know, we're living in little wattled huts.
Right.
So, so and also to be serious, the Manitoban people are very you know, very thoughtful, and they're very careful to do things like social distancing and all those precautions. You know, you get the odd, you know, fool, but mostly it's been very sensible here. So,
okay.
So yeah, I'm able to, like, you know, I go to thrift shops, I go to the record store, I go to stores. You know, you put your mask on, you go inside, and
for sure,
everything's cool.
Yeah.
So far, so good.
Mm-hmm. Great. Okay. Well, let's look at that last photo because it certainly evokes certain memories for me.
Yeah.
So okay. Well, so you have thought, and you've spent a long time reading, let's say, philosophically based writers and material, and you're a thinker. Now that you have this bank of so many photographs, and what is your interpretation of the explosion of photography and image making, say in the past, say 5 or 10 years, you know, with selfies and all this stuff, as compared to?
I totally understand it. I mean, it's what I like about. I mean, I love photography, so it makes sense that other people, if it's so easily available because it's on your phone or whatever, I can understand why so many people would be drawn to it. But it's fun.
Okay, yeah, no, it is fun. Yeah, but so what about the idea of? So you have this record, and you have all these amazing records. Is it purely to rekindle the past as a kind of a fading memory, or?
Oh, it depends. I mean, there's the aesthetic pleasure of the image itself. You know, like that's what always draws me back to some of these old black and white pictures. It's just they're nice to look at. But for me personally, they're a tool of remembrance for sure, you know, and of reconstructing the past.
Right.
Like you can go deep into any artifact. It doesn't have to be a photograph. It can be anything from the past, right? Like it could be something you wrote, or it could be an article of clothing. It could be a song. You know, but what's his name? Marcel Proust, when he wrote Remembrance of Things Past. His memories are triggered when he bites into a kind of a cake.
Yeah, the Madeleine. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, like, so okay. When I look at this photograph, I'll describe it. You printed it in a way so that essentially the image fades on the sides into the white of the photographic paper. In the middle of the photo is Janine, I guess, cutting something on a cutting board. This must have been very soon after my accident because I look skeletal. Like I was pretty thin back then, but you know, after the coma and everything.
No, this is when we were roommates, Fred.
It was really. It wasn't. Oh my goodness, I'm so wrong. It's before my accident, but still skeletal. So this is when we were roommates. Okay, this is our old apartment. I don't remember this at all.
It's in the kitchen there, and I think Evie's there.
Yeah, Evie's in the background, I guess, drinking coffee. Yeah. I think that's Janine. It looks like Janine. Can't really see her face.
No, I think it's Victoria.
Really? Really?
I think so. But, you know, I understand why it's hard to tell, because these are prints that I made when I was first getting back to using the darkroom in the shed, as I told you before, the back shed of the apartment. I was like sort of doing it by ear. So I was like, making the chemicals, mixing the chemicals, and all this stuff, like trying to remember what I did 10 years before or whatever.
Right.
It would have been so long since I'd done this. And the enlarger was kind of weird too. Like I don't think it had the right kind of bulb in it, which is why you get that halo. Yeah, it's sort of weird. So that's sort of why I chose that picture. I mean, I chose it because you're in there, right? And it's it connects us together, but also just for the weirdness of not really successfully developing negatives, for instance, doing a bad job of developing the negatives, and then doing a worse job of printing the print, and then putting it through Photoshop, which is what I did with that, right? Bring it to some point where at least you could sort of make out what's going on in the picture. So it looks like something, taken 100 years ago.
Right.
In a way.
So, so just to describe it, 3 people in the kitchen in a very typical Montreal style apartment. Somebody's at the counter. It's so funny how dueling memories, right? So in my mind, that was my ex-girlfriend, and you're like, no, that was Victoria, your ex-girlfriend and ex-partner.
Our colleague.
yeah. And then we have Eby as well, who is an author, is a very kind of successful published author. And
a teacher.
Yeah, and a teacher as well. But what's interesting is that the print itself is printed in a way that is this kind of, like, for example, when I look at my face, I don't really recognize my face as, I realize it's me and I see it as me, but it doesn't mesh with my self-image or sense of self. And so it has this kind of dreamlike quality, this weird kind of memory overlap.
It's like looking through layers of time somehow.
Yeah, for sure. Wow, interesting. Do you remember making this photo? I mean, other than the fact that we lived together, and at that time, we were.
I don't. I mean, it's obvious we were having supper together, and I just thought, oh, I have film in the camera. Let's take a picture.
Right.
That's they're basically snapshots. Like I've never been thinking, oh, it's art.
Right. Where was an image of yours published in a way that for you was a thrill?
Oh, gee.
Are you the kind of person who's been like making art anyways, and then banging your head against the wall to get it published, or you're just like, well, if it gets published, it gets published. If it doesn't, it doesn't. It's not why I do it.
Well, no. Like in the early '90s, I was writing some stories that I thought. I was sort of deliberately trying to write fiction, quote unquote, and it did get published in magazines back then, like literary magazines. Whereas now, the stuff that I'm sending around, I'm doing it the same way. Like I don't have an agent, so I'm just sending it cold to various publications out there, and nobody's interested, right? So yes, it does make a difference when you're trying to get published, you're trying to get noticed, and you're willing to bend to the whims of whoever has the power to do that for you, right? I was writing stories back then where I would just think, that I'm going to write the most cardboard characters I can come up with, just the fakest 2-dimensional characters conceivable, and I'm going to put them through the most, banal situations you can imagine. And I bet you that someone's going to like that. And that's what happened, right?
Really, yeah.
But the reason I'm interested in writing autobiography, like it is fiction. It's not, it's not like a memoir. It is a piece of fiction, but because I want to bring more verisimilitude. People, they like to read books really because they sort of know what's going to happen, because there's so many formulas that people run through for plots and everything. But I'm more interested in what happens if there's no plot, right? And things are just happening, and they just keep happening.
One of the things that kind of gets on my nerves in Hong Kong is that because of the socioeconomic history and reality, people here are very literal. It's very literal. It's kind of like, you know, if, you know, and you know me, you know, I like to fuck around and just do just kind of absurd, just like, what is that all about? I understand what you're saying in that when you're trying to manipulate or play with expectations and also the formal qualities of a work that you're producing, you're trying to push your own thinking outwards, and maybe it'll succeed and maybe it'll fail, but it's more like the exercise of pushing that boundary is the point.
I wrote an essay a while ago called The Poetics of Perception. And that was what I was writing about there was, you know, what did I think I was doing with this practice? And it's really working with my own consciousness. Mm-hmm. That's sort of the bottom line. It's like, what can I do to broaden this, to deepen this, to better experience what reality really is?
Find your people, buddy. Find your people. Find some people to connect, because that's going to feed you.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Thanks, Vince.
Thank you so much for joining me, Randall Fancy, for this episode of Shooting It Raw. I really appreciate it. If you want to learn more about the show in general or today's guest in particular, be sure to check out the episode notes at www.shootingraw.com. That's shooting-it-raw.com. I appreciate everyone who takes some time out of their day to give Shooting It Raw a listen. So get out there, make amazing photos, and be sure to appreciate how amazing the world is. Gratitude and a sense of humor